The morning began like any other soft light spilling through the thin curtains, the distant hum of waves curling against the shore. Emma Carter adjusted the camera strap around her neck and squinted into the viewfinder framing the horizon where the sea met the winter sky. A gull dipped low over the water wings, catching the gold of sunrise, and she pressed the shutter. She had always loved the ocean at dawn. There was something about its stillness before the day's noise began, the way the tide whispered secrets only the patient could hear. But today, even as the salt air cooled her skin, a dull ache gnawed at her side. She had been ignoring it for weeks, chalking it up to fatigue from work and motherhood. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her coat. The screen lit up with the name of her doctor's clinic. She hesitated only a fraction of a second, but long enough for her heart to trip over itself before answering. The voice on the other end was steady, almost rehearsed. "Emma, we'd like you to come in today. The results are back." The ache in her side seemed to spread, wrapping around her ribs. She swallowed her throat dry. "Is it serious?" A pause. It would be better to talk in person. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of seaweed and something metallic from the pier. Emma turned away from the water and began walking toward her car, her camera swinging heavily against her hip. By the time she sat in the small consultation room, the air felt too thin. The blinds were half drawn, casting striped shadows across the wall. Her doctor, Dr. Hannah Lee, looked at her with the kind of gaze that tried to be gentle but couldn't disguise its weight. "I'm afraid it's ovarian cancer, Emma. Stage 4. The words did not seem to land. All at once they arrived in fragments like waves breaking unevenly on a shore. Cancer. Stage 4. Ovarian. Each piece sharp enough to cut. How long?" The question felt foreign in her mouth. Dr. Lee's lips pressed together before she answered. "Months, maybe a year with treatment. But the treatments will be aggressive." Emma's first thought wasn't about herself. It was of Noah, 4 years old, with hair that stuck up at the crown no matter how many times she smoothed it down, with eyes that always seemed to search hers for the next story, the next game. She nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was to acknowledge the diagnosis or to stop herself from collapsing. The rest of the appointment passed in fragments, treatment options, symptom management, support groups, but her mind had already drifted elsewhere. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon when she walked in later that morning. A neighbor had dropped off a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, and Noah was at the table, his small hands tearing it apart in uneven chunks. He looked up and grinned, his cheeks smudged with flour. "Mommy, I made a fort." He pointed toward the living room where a quilt and 2 dining chairs had been transformed into a castle. Emma felt her knees weaken, not from the illness, but from the sheer, overwhelming need to memorize him exactly as he was in that moment. Later, when Noah was napping, she sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper. She had no plan for the months ahead, no idea how to stretch them wide enough to fit all the love she wanted to give. Then, an idea began to take shape, not in a flash, but like the slow emerging of a photograph in a dark room. She would write him letters. One for each birthday until he turned 18. Advice. Memories. Little pieces of herself folded into envelopes he could open long after she was gone. She could almost see it him at 10, unfolding a letter about courage. At 16, reading her words about first love. At 18, discovering a truth she had carried silently. Emma reached for a pen. The first words came haltingly, each one heavier than the last. "Dear Noah, on this day?" Her hand trembled, the ink pooling where the pen paused too long. She pressed on. "You are 5 years old, and your laughter fills this home like sunlight through the windows. I hope you never lose the way you run toward joy." The letters would be her way of holding him through time, of being there when she could not. She didn't know how many she could finish before her body betrayed her, but she knew she had to start now. Outside, the ocean kept moving, the tide shifting in and out as it always had. Somewhere in that rhythm, Emma felt the faint echo of resolve. That night, after Noah was asleep, she gathered a stack of stationery and a small box to keep the letters safe. She wrote until her hand cramped, the words spilling faster, as if she feared they might escape her entirely. When she finally stopped, she held the first envelope up to the lamplight, tracing her son's name with the tip of her finger. A tear slid down her cheek, landing on the corner of the paper. She let it dry there, a small invisible mark only she would know was part of the story. In the quiet, she whispered to the empty room, "Happy birthday, my boy." Emma placed the envelope into the box, but her gaze lingered on the empty space beside it. She imagined the other letters yet to come, a fragile bridge she would try to build across the years. She didn't know if she could finish it, but she knew she would try. And somewhere deep in her chest, an unspoken thought pressed forward. One day, there will be something I must tell you, but not yet. Nights had always been Emma's quiet refuge, but now they became her battlefield. The house would fall into its gentle rhythm. Noah's breathing slow and steady from his room. The faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, the refrigerator humming in the background. And there, she would sit at the kitchen table, pen in hand, the soft cone of lamplight falling over the blank page. Her first letter was for his 5th birthday, though she had written it months in advance. She tried to imagine him at 5, what new words he'd learn, the way his face might thin out as he grew, the sound of his laughter deepening. "Dear Noah, on this day you are 5 years old." The sentences came more easily than she expected, as if some part of her had been holding them for years. She told him about the time they built a fort in the living room and how he had insisted the dragon outside was real. She wrote about how he always tried to share the last bite of his food with her, even if it was his favorite cookie. She ended with a wish, may your curiosity always outrun your fear. By the second night, she had moved on to the letter for his 6th birthday. This one felt different. Less about the moment, more about the shape of the person she hoped he would become. Dear Noah, at 6, you will have questions about everything. Don't stop asking them. The world will try to quiet your voice, but I hope you keep asking why until you understand the truth. And sometimes even when you don't get an answer, keep looking. As she wrote, the pain in her side flared sharp enough to pull her out of the sentence. She set the pen down, closing her eyes, waiting for the wave to pass. It did, eventually leaving her breathless but determined. The letters began to stack up their envelopes, labeled in careful handwriting Noah, age 5 Noah, age 6 Noah, age 7. Each felt like a thread she was weaving into a tapestry she would never see completed. One afternoon at the clinic, while waiting for another round of blood tests, she mentioned the letters to Dr. Hannah Lee. The doctor listened quietly, then said, "You'll need someone to keep them safe, someone you trust completely." That night, Emma called Jacob Miller. Jacob had been her friend since they were 16, a boy who had once dared her to skip school and watch the tide come in. He arrived at her apartment carrying a paper bag of takeout and the same easy grin she remembered. But when he saw the neat stack of envelopes on the table, his expression shifted. "They're for Noah," she explained. "One for every birthday. I need you to keep them safe. Give them to him when the time comes." Jacob picked up the first letter, holding it delicately as though it might crumble. His eyes flicked over the first line, but Emma reached out and took it back before he could read further. "They're for him," she said gently, "not for anyone else." He nodded, but then his gaze fell on a single envelope set apart from the rest, a pale blue one, unmarked except for her handwriting that simply said, "For the day you feel lost." "What's this one?" he asked. Emma's fingers closed around it before he could pick it up. "That one's different. It's not for a birthday. He'll get it when he needs it most. You'll know the moment." Jacob studied her face for a moment, then let it go. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll keep them safe. All of them." "Dad." Back at the kitchen table later that night, Emma reached for another sheet of paper. The lamplight pooled in gold over her hands, highlighting the fine tremor in her fingers. This letter was for his 7th birthday. Dear Noah, sometimes you will fall. When you do, remember that the ground is only the beginning of the climb back up. Every step you take from there makes you stronger than the one before. She paused, picturing him with scraped knees, the way he might scowl through his tears until someone, maybe Jacob, maybe a teacher, made him laugh again. She slipped the letter into its envelope and added it to the growing stack. The box was starting to look full, yet she knew it was still far from complete. One evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Emma found herself standing by his bedroom door, listening to the soft rustle of his breathing. She wanted to freeze the moment to anchor herself in the simple fact that he was here safe and warm. The ache in her chest had nothing to do with her illness. It was the weight of knowing how much she would miss how many birthdays, how many ordinary Tuesday mornings, how many quiet nights like this one. She returned to the table, opened a fresh sheet, and began the letter for his 8th birthday. Dear Noah, joy is not something you wait for. It's something you make even out of the smallest pieces. Find it in the smell of fresh bread, the sound of waves, the laughter you share with someone you love. She folded the letter carefully, slid it into its envelope, and pressed her lips to the seal before tucking it away. A week later, Jacob stopped by to collect the first batch of letters. He placed them into a weathered leather satchel, treating them as though they were glass. "You're sure about this?" he asked, pausing at the doorway. "I'm sure," she said. "If I can't be there, I want my words to be." Jacob glanced at the stack one last time, then his eyes landed again on the pale blue envelope. "That one stays with me?" he asked. Emma hesitated before answering. "Yes. And Jacob, when you give it to him, make sure he's ready. It's the one that matters most." Later that night, Emma lingered at the kitchen table long after she'd finished writing. She stared at the blank space left in the box, picturing the letters yet to come. Age 9, 10, 13, 16, 18, each one a mile marker she would not live to see. She picked up her pen again, but instead of starting the next birthday letter, she found herself writing a single line on a slip of paper. "One day, there will be something I must tell you, but not yet." She folded it and placed it into a small envelope, leaving it unmarked. It wasn't part of the official plan, but she felt compelled to write it all the same. As she turned off the lamp, the room sank into shadow. The box of letters sat quietly on the table, its contents still incomplete. Somewhere among them, the pale blue envelope waited silent, sealed, and holding a truth that would not be spoken for years to come. The days that followed began to take on a fragile clarity, as if each one were a glass sphere Emma had to carry with both hands. She knew they were borrowed time she wasn't meant to have, yet had been given anyway, and she was determined to fill them with something Noah could hold on to when she was gone. On a windy Saturday morning, she took him to the beach. The sky was pale with winter light, and the tide had retreated far enough to reveal a long stretch of damp sand speckled with seashells. Noah ran ahead, his small boots leaving erratic patterns of prints behind him. "Pick one for the box," she called out, watching him crouch to examine a fragment of shell. The memory box had started as a way to keep him occupied on days when her energy was thin. Now it had become something else entirely, a small wooden chest in which they placed tokens from their days together, smooth stones from the shore photos she printed at home, a broken toy car he refused to throw away. Noah chose a flat gray stone shaped almost like a heart. He ran back, holding it up with both hands. "This one's for when we went to the beach in the cold," he said. Emma smiled, tucking the stone into her pocket. "Perfect," she said, though her voice caught on the word. "Teen." That night, after he was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and began his 7th birthday letter. Dear Noah, sometimes you will fall. Sometimes the world will push you down harder than you expect. But the ground is only the beginning of the climb back up. Every step you take from there will make you stronger than the one before. Her handwriting wavered halfway through the pen, jerking slightly when a sharp ache bloomed low in her abdomen. She set the pen down, pressing her palm against her side, breathing slowly until the pain eased enough to continue. She thought about adding a note explaining her illness, but stopped. That wasn't what these letters were for. They were about him, not her. About how to live, not about how she was leaving. Met. The 8th birthday letter came a few days later, written after a storm passed through town. Dear Noah, joy is not something you wait for, it's something you make. Sometimes it will be as small as the smell of bread in the oven, or the sound of waves, or the laughter of someone you love. Collect those moments. They are the real treasures you will carry. She folded it neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and stacked it with the others. The box was filling up. Each envelope a step further from the present, further into a future she would never see. By early spring, the treatments had begun to take their toll. There were days when she could barely get out of bed when food had no taste and the world outside the apartment felt impossibly far away. But Noah didn't see the worst of it. She saved those moments for when he was at school or asleep. Jacob started coming by more often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting with her while she rested. He never asked to read the letters, but his eyes always went to the pale blue envelope. It sat apart from the others, as if it knew it wasn't meant to belong to any year. One evening, while Emma was putting the letters into the box, she caught Jacob watching her. "That one," he said, nodding toward the blue envelope. "You've never told me what's in it." "And I won't," she said, tucking it away. "Not until it's time." Jacob didn't press, but she saw the question still in his eyes. In April, Noah brought home a drawing from school, 2 stick figures holding hands under a huge yellow sun. He'd scrawled "Me and Mom" in uneven letters. Emma taped it to the refrigerator. It stayed there, a splash of color in the quiet kitchen. That night, she began another letter, one that wasn't tied to a birthday at all. She didn't even label it. "Noah, if you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in a place where the world feels too heavy. I need you to remember you are not alone. Even if I'm not there, you carry me in every heartbeat. Keep walking forward. The road bends, but it does not end." She slid the letter into a plain envelope and set it aside. This was not part of the original plan, but something in her told her he might need it sooner than she thought. Good. The pain became harder to hide by summer. She learned to time her writing between the surges to keep her pen moving before her body could betray her. The letters grew more urgent, her words sharper and clearer, as if she knew each one might be her last. One night, the power went out in the building. The apartment was dark, except for the flicker of a single candle on the table. She pulled the memory box toward her and opened it, running her fingers over the envelopes. There were still so many left to write. 9, 10, 13, 16, 18. The years stretched out before her in neat, sealed milestones she would never cross. She began the 9th birthday letter by candlelight. Dear Noah, bravery is not about never being afraid. It's about feeling the fear and stepping forward anyway. If you're ever standing on the edge of something new and you don't know what's waiting, take the step. Trust your feet to find the ground. She sealed it, placed it in the box, and blew out the candle. The room was dark, but she could still see the box in her mind, its contents glowing like small beacons in the years ahead. The following week, she took Noah to the park. They lay on their backs in the grass clouds drifting overhead. He pointed at one that looked like a ship, another like a dragon. Emma closed her eyes and listened to his voice, letting it settle into her bones. She wished she could bottle the sound and tuck it into one of the envelopes. That night, she pulled the pale blue envelope from the box. She held it for a long time, tracing the flap with her thumb. Then she placed it back untouched. "Not yet," she whispered. The blue envelope sat there in the box, quiet and patient, as if it knew it would outlast all the others. And somewhere deep down, Emma feared it might be the only one Noah truly needed. By late summer, Emma's handwriting had begun to change. It was still neat, still careful, but the lines were thinner now, the letters more fragile, as if the ink itself were straining to hold its shape. The days were harder. Fatigue settled into her bones like a stubborn guest, and the nausea from treatments came in sudden waves that left her gripping the edges of the sink. Still, she wrote. The box was nearly full now, the envelopes stacked in order, each one a milestone she would never see. She knew it was time. If anything happened suddenly, and she'd been warned, Noah's letters couldn't be left to chance. They needed a guardian. 4. Jacob arrived one afternoon carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of groceries. He set them on the counter and glanced toward the memory box on the table. "You've been busy," he said softly. Emma nodded, sliding the last completed letter into the stack. "They're ready. Or, as ready as they can be." She reached for the box, lifted it with both hands, and held it out to him. "It's yours now. Keep it somewhere safe. Give him the right one on the right birthday. And the blue one." Jacob's eyes flicked to it immediately. "Only when you know he truly needs it," she finished. He hesitated, then took the box. The weight of it seemed to settle on his shoulders, not in ounces, but in years. Duh. They sat for a while at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting across the floor. It reminded Emma of the day they first became friends, 16 years old, skipping class, walking barefoot along the tide line. "You told me once," Jacob said, "that you didn't want an ordinary life." Emma smiled faintly. "I guess I got my wish. Just not in the way I thought." He didn't argue. Some truths didn't need softening. Dad. That night, after Jacob left with the box, Emma stood in Noah's doorway watching him sleep. His small chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his arm curled under his cheek. She thought about all the nights she had stood like this and all the nights she wouldn't. In the quiet, she whispered, "I'm doing everything I can to stay with you, my boy, even if it's only on paper." Her hospital visits grew longer. There were days when she didn't make it home at all, days when Noah stayed with the neighbor Mrs. Hollis, who baked him cookies and let him watch cartoons past bedtime. One rainy afternoon, Emma found herself in a hospital bed, the rain tapping steadily against the window. She had brought a notebook with her pages half filled with drafts for the later birthday letters. The morphine dulled the sharper edges of her pain, but left her thoughts drifting like boats untethered from the shore. She began the letter for his 13th birthday. "Dear Noah, if you ever fall in love, and I hope you do, let it be with someone who listens to the quiet parts of you, and the parts that aren't loud, the parts you're afraid no one will understand. And when you find them, be that person for them too." Her pen hesitated on the word love. She thought about her own, the one that had given her Noah. She wondered if he would ever know the truth. Her instinct told her no until the day came when he was ready. She sealed the letter, placed it on the tray table beside her bed, and stared at it until the nurse came to collect it for Jacob. Jacob visited the next morning, the box now hidden away somewhere safe. He handed her a photograph Noah at the park, swinging so high his toes pointed toward the clouds. "He's all right," Jacob said. "He's happy." Emma traced the edges of the photo. "That's all I want." Jacob lingered, then asked, "If I'm not here when he turns 18, if something happens to me, who should take the letters?" She met his gaze. "Then you make sure someone who loves him takes them, someone who will guard them the way you have. These letters are his map. Without them, he might lose his way." As the weeks passed, Emma's world narrowed to the hospital room, the slow drip of IV fluids, and the steady shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway. She tried to keep writing, but some days the pain made it impossible. On those days, she dictated to Jacob. Her voice was slower now, her breath shorter, but her words still came with the same urgency. "You have to write it exactly as I say," she told him once. "No fixing my words, even if they're messy." Jacob nodded, pen moving. "Messy's how we know it's real." One evening, she asked Jacob to bring her the pale blue envelope. He hesitated before retrieving it from his bag. Emma held it for a long moment, running her fingers along the sealed flap. Then she placed it back in his hands. "Promise me you'll know when it's time." "I promise," he said, and the way his voice caught made her believe him. In late September, a storm rolled in off the coast. Emma lay in bed listening to the wind rattle the window. She imagined Noah at home, tucked into bed, the quilt pulled up to his chin. She pictured the box of letters in Jacob's care, each one a small anchor holding him steady against the years ahead. That night, Emma dreamed she was standing on the shore with Noah. The tide was pulling out, carrying something small and blue toward the horizon. She reached for it, but the water took it away. When she woke, her first thought was of the pale blue envelope and the knowledge that someday it would carry him farther than she ever could. Time did what it always does. It moved forward indifferent to what it left behind. Noah turned 10 on a Saturday in early spring. The air was cool and clean, the kind of day Emma would have called photographer's light. Jacob arrived that morning carrying a small envelope, its seal unbroken. He handed it to Noah with a quiet, "This one's from your mom." Noah opened it slowly, smoothing the creases with his palm. Dear Noah, at 10 years old, I hope you found something you love to do, not because you're good at it, but because it makes you lose track of time. Try a sport, a game, a hobby. And if you lose, because you will learn to shake hands, smile, and try again. Losing gracefully is a kind of victory. Noah read it twice, the words settling into him like warm sunlight. He tucked the letter back into its envelope and slid it under his pillow as if afraid the words might fade if left out too long. 3 years later, on a rainy afternoon, he opened the letter for his 13th birthday. Dear Noah, if you've ever hurt someone, say you're sorry, and mean it. If someone has hurt you, try to forgive not because they deserve it, but because carrying anger will tire you more than carrying love. You don't have to forget, but you can choose what to hold on to. He didn't tell anyone, but those words came back to him a week later when he had an argument with his best friend, Daniel. They hadn't spoken for days, until Noah sent a text, "I'm sorry." It was a small thing, but it lifted something heavy from his chest. When he turned 15, life felt more complicated than any letter could fix. The season had started badly for his school soccer team. He had been practicing harder than ever, but the week before the championship selection, his name wasn't on the final roster. That night, Jacob came by with a different envelope, pale blue. Noah recognized it immediately, though he'd never seen it before. This one, Jacob said quietly, isn't for a birthday. Your mom said I'd know when to give it to you. I think it's time. Noah sat on the edge of his bed, the envelope trembling slightly in his hands. He broke the seal. Noah, if you're reading this, it means you've found yourself in a place where the world feels too heavy. I need you to remember you are not alone. Even if I'm not there, you carry me in every heartbeat. Every ending is just a bend in your road, not the end of it. Keep walking forward. The road bends, but it does not end. He read the letter 3 times before setting it down. The words didn't erase the disappointment, but they shifted it, making it smaller, less like a wall, and more like a hill he could climb. Still, one line kept echoing. One day you will learn why I made the choice. I did. Choice. He turned the phrase over in his mind for days. What choice? And why did it matter so much that she'd leave it in a letter meant for his hardest moments? He asked Jacob once in the middle of a car ride. What did she mean by that? The choice. Jacob's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Some things. You'll understand when you're older. It wasn't the answer Noah wanted, but it was the only one he would get. By 16, he had learned to live with the absence not because it hurt less, but because he had learned to carry it differently. On the morning of his 16th birthday, he opened the envelope labeled in his mother's careful script. Dear Noah, you might be falling in love right now, or maybe not yet. When you do, let it be with someone who sees the quiet parts of you, the parts you're afraid no one will understand, and be that person for them too. He didn't think he was in love, not exactly, but there was a girl in his art class who laughed at his bad jokes and drew tiny stars in the margins of her notebook. He thought about showing her the letter, but something told him it was meant to be his alone, at least for now. Through the years, he noticed patterns in her words. She always ended with hope, always gave him something to reach for, even in the letters that hinted at the pain she never spoke of directly. And yet, that one sentence from the blue envelope lingered, pulling at the edges of his understanding. By the time he approached 18, the weight of the unopened envelope marked Noah, age 18, felt heavier than any before. It sat in Jacob's keeping, sealed and waiting. Noah had stopped asking about the choice, but he hadn't stopped thinking about it. Sometimes he wondered if knowing would change everything or nothing at all. On the night before his 18th birthday, Noah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in Jacob's house, the final letter was waiting. He didn't know why, but he felt certain that whatever it held would not only answer his questions, but also change the way he carried his mother's absence for the rest of his life. The morning of his 18th birthday arrived quietly without the fanfare most people imagined for such a milestone. The sky was overcast, the kind of muted gray his mother used to say made colors stand out more. Jacob was already waiting when Noah came downstairs. He was holding a small, weathered box, the same one Emma had once handed him years ago. "This is the last one," Jacob said. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of something long kept, and "She wanted you to have this too." He set the pale blue envelope beside the one marked Noah, age 18. Noah stared at them for a moment. The envelopes felt heavier than they looked, as if the years themselves were pressed into the paper. He opened the birthday letter first. "Dear Noah, you are 18 now. An adult in the eyes of the world. But to me, you will always be the boy with sand in his shoes and questions in his eyes. I can't tell you exactly how to live your life. No one can. But I can tell you how I hope you will live it with kindness for others and for yourself, with courage to stand where it's difficult, with the understanding that you are allowed to change to begin again as many times as you need. And now, there is something I must tell you, something I could not write in the earlier letters because you were not ready. But if you are reading this, I believe you are." Noah's hands tightened on the paper. His breath slowed as though bracing for a wave. "Dear, your father did not leave us because he wanted to. He was a firefighter. One night when you were still a baby, there was a building fire in the next town. He went in to rescue a child trapped on the top floor. He got the child out, but he didn't make it back for himself. The newspapers called him a hero. I just called him the love of my life. I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want your grief to carry the weight of anger. I didn't want you to grow up believing someone had abandoned you. I wanted you to stand on the foundation of love, not resentment." Noah's vision blurred. His mind tried to fit this truth into the empty space where the story of his father had been a space he had unknowingly carried his whole life. The letter continued. "When I got sick, the doctors told me there were treatments that might buy me more time. But they also said those treatments would take almost everything from me, my energy, my ability to think clearly, my days with you while I was still myself. I chose to stay present, even if it meant leaving sooner. That was the choice I wrote about in your blue envelope." Noah set the birthday letter down. His hands reached for the pale blue envelope, fingers tracing the seal. He opened it carefully. "Dear Noah, this is the truth I saved for the day you needed it most. I chose to leave before the sickness could take away the mother you knew. I didn't want your last memories of me to be filled with wires, machines, and pain I couldn't hide. I wanted you to remember me chasing you down the beach baking cookies too big for the tray, laughing so hard I cried. That was my gift to you, memories untouched by the worst of my illness. And I need you to know with absolute certainty I never stopped fighting to stay. My love for you was and is the strongest thing I have ever known. It will walk with you into every tomorrow." Noah closed his eyes. The silence in the room felt full thick with all the words he could never say back to her. When he looked up, Jacob was watching him quietly. "She asked me to give you space after you read them," Jacob said. "So, I'll be outside." Noah nodded, unable to speak. And he stayed at the table for a long time, the letters spread before him. He traced the handwriting, the slight slope of the letters, the way the ink sometimes bled where her pen had paused. Each imperfection was a fingerprint of her presence. Memories began to surface her voice reading him bedtime stories, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen, the feel of her hand on the back of his head when she hugged him close. And now, added to those, the image of a man he'd never met, but who had run into fire for a child he didn't know. His father. When he finally stepped outside, the clouds had begun to thin. The light was soft, filtering through in pale gold. He walked down toward the beach, the letters still in his hand. The tide was coming in the waves, rolling low and steady. He stood where the sand was damp and cool, the foam licking at the edges of his shoes. He read the last line of the blue envelope again. "Every ending is just a bend in your road, not the end of it." "That's it," Noah knelt, placing the blue envelope on the wet sand. The wind caught it, lifting it just enough to let the water take it. It drifted out, spinning gently, the pale paper growing darker as it soaked. He stayed there until it was just a blur against the horizon. For the first time in years, the ache in his chest felt different, not lighter exactly, but no longer something that pulled him backward. It was a weight that steadied him, a reminder of where he'd come from and who had carried him this far. He looked out at the water and whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't sure if it was to his mother, his father, or both. Maybe it didn't matter. Tiens. As he turned to leave, he saw a single white daisy caught in the seaweed at his feet. He picked it up, twirling it between his fingers. It wasn't a perfect flower. One petal was bent, another slightly torn, but it was enough to make him smile. He slipped it into his pocket, a new kind of keepsake for his own memory box. Kid. Final image. Noah walking up the beach, the horizon behind him brightening with morning light. The sound of the waves faded, replaced in his mind by his mother's voice, soft, certain, and forever with him. "Live bravely, my son."